Hello everyone. We would like to wish the multifaceted MS Sathyu a happy 90th birthday. BIC is happy to present four of MS Sathyu's films as part of a retrospective of his work in film. Today we will be discussing Garm Hava, his seminal film made in the 70s. In conversation with Sathyu is noted film critic Baradwaj Rangan. Thank you so much, Baradwaj and Sathyu, for doing this for us today. Over to you, Baradwaj.
So it's a real pleasure to be doing this with you, and congratulations on your 90th birthday. Before we start talking about Garam Hawa, I wanted to just ask you about the social and cinematic changes that were evident when you were making the film. Now, just a decade before, in the 1960s, we have this big flourishing Muslim social subgenre happening, right? You have Chaudhry Ka Chand, you have Mere Mehboob, and all these films about Muslims and Nawabs and all these things doing so well at the box office. But by the time we come to Garm Hawa, which is in like the early 70s, there's some cynicism and disenchantment in the air. Can you take us through those times and what happened at the point that you were making this film?
You see, it was not a planned effort to make Garam Hava. It just happened that the finance for another script was not sanctioned by Karanjia Saab of the Film Finance Corporation. And he said, we would like to finance you, but give us a different script. So we talked to Visma Chuktai, and she just narrated some story, what happened during the partition in her family. And so that Shama made it into a film script. So the whole thing is accidental.
It's okay.
You know, it was not an intended effort. Then we said, we'll make this film if the loan is sanctioned by the Film Finance Corporation. So we got a 250,000 loan from the FFC, and we went to Agra. We did our survey first, and we spotted the places where we wanted to shoot, and all that usual recce has to be done, location, and it's very difficult. A very crowded city like Agra to shoot. So one had to work out ways and means of making the camera unconscious, you know. So a lot of candid photography was done. That's how we managed it. And it so happened, you see, invariably the Muslim people were represented in the Hindi cinema as more or less of the, either they were Tawaims or Nawabs, a very decadent kind of, usage of the Muslims. It was never a realistic kind of approach. The Muslims are also part of a secular country like India, and you have to look at them as part of the mainstream. And the Hindi cinema never looked at the Muslim as a mainstream citizen. So that way, Garam Hava became different.
Right.
You know, no doubt it was a little touchy subject, and it was a highly sentimental also. In fact, the sentimental part made it into a greater appeal from the audiences, because Indian audiences always like tear jerkers, and Garm Hava is a very good tear jerker. You know.
I don't know if I would call it a tearjerker, because today you're kind of, the film has such an exalted position that when you think about it as a tearjerker, it seems to have changed into a melodrama. So
No, it was not melodramatic as such. It was basically showing the Muslims as part of a population.
right.
All this business about minorities, the reservations, all these didn't matter to us.
Yeah.
We were just looking at the Muslims of a particular area or a particular in UP, for example, where a lot of people migrated to Pakistan, and in the hope that they were going to have a heavenly life in Pakistan,
Yeah.
Which was not true. In fact, a lot of people who went and they were not accepted by the Punjabi Muslims. The UP Muslim was never accepted. So then these Muslims from Pakistan, they did not return, but they went abroad. They went to Canada, they went to United States, they went to Gulf countries,
Yeah.
and then they started their life there and their businesses. So it is a very different kind of a situation as such.
So when you you say that the story happened accidentally because of a certain whatever happened, but were you also, when you got the story in your hand, did you also feel there was a certain timeliness to it? Because obviously when the partition had just happened, what we see in the story was happening, and a lot of the story in Garm Hava is very resonant today, in today's times, because especially when you hear this Balraj Sahni's character's elder brother saying this line, and I'm going to read it out: "Ab Hindustan mein kisi Musalman ke liye koi jagah nahi." It's almost like some rhetoric being spouted today. But how was it in the 1970s? Was it something in the air, or was it like, as the Hindi film showed us, Hindu-Muslim bhai bhai?
Obviously, it was so. That's what many people in the Muslim populated areas like UP, for example, or Bihar, they felt that way. And so when Pakistan was already formed, so they thought, तो हमारे लिए एक जन्नत बन गई है. But it was not true.
Right.
The reality was very different. You see, any theological state is no answer. And in fact, Pakistan and Bangladesh and India, if you take, there are more Muslims in India than in these two countries or any other Arab country, for example. A greater number of Muslims live even today in India. After Indonesia, I think the largest Muslim population is in India. So this secular character, this fabric, was very important. And it had come historically, if you see the past history, you see most of the country in India as such was ruled by the Muslims. Only in the south that you had some Hindu kingdoms like the Cholas or the Pandyas or the Kadambas or the Hoysalas and people like that. But the rest of the country was ruled. The majority of the country, the major part of the country was ruled by the Muslims. And even in the south, the sultanates were there, which ruled. you know. It's only after the defeat of the Vijayanagar Empire by the sultans that things changed. You know? So I personally feel that India was not partitioned. Punjab was partitioned and Bengal was partitioned. India was not partitioned. So to me, who come from a place like Mysore, partition had no sense, no meaning at all. For that matter, for the Muslims or of the Deccan, south of Narmada, if you take, the Muslims were not affected by the partition.
Yeah.
You know? So this whole business of India's partition, I don't consider India was partitioned. Even today. And today, again, in spite of all the historical things which have happened, political things which have happened, India is still a united secular country. And that secularism is the most important factor which holds the country together. You know, we cannot become a theological state. The Hindu majority is there, but when you compare the Hindus to the other religions, so Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, they are much bigger religions than Hinduism. The followers of Hinduism are less in number in the world. You know, although India is a home for Hindus, and it is a Hindu country, that way if you look at it, because Hindu majority is there. But that Hindu majority of India has always, you know, looked after other communities. It allowed other religions to grow. And that is the uniqueness of India.
After working with Chetan Anand for a bit, you went to Delhi, and then when he was planning Hakikat, you went and joined him again. And I read in an interview that you did that because the Indochina war had happened, and a lot of feeling was there about an anti-China feeling was there in everybody, and that made you want to be a part of that film. Was there something like that that sparked you when you read this screenplay for Garm Hava?
Garm Hava came up much later.
Yeah.
Almost a decade later.
Yeah.
Because in 1962, the Chinese aggression took place, and parts of the Indian territory was claimed by the Chinese, like what they are doing today, almost in the same area. This has been a disputed thing. So that has not changed, in that way. The claims of the Chinese is still there. But in one way, when the Chinese, aggressed, India became a little stronger. It got united. And everyone was very angry with Zhou Enlai, who let down Nehru. You see? So that big shock, which happened in 1962, so that led on to the first war film in India, and that was Chetan Anand's Hakikat. Later on, a few other war films were made, but they were all anti-Pakistan. The Muslims, when you make an anti-Pakistan film, it becomes an anti-Indian Muslim. This is the danger. There were lots of films which were made during the period when the BJP was ruling at that time, at the center for the first time when they came at the center. So they funded, they helped, and they gave a lot of facilities for filmmakers, and a lot of films were made. Films like Border, Fuzz, and many, there's a huge number of films on partition and the Muslims. So, but unfortunately, it's a very delicate subject. When you're dealing with the Muslims, you have to be very careful, as a filmmaker. You have to be politically correct. And politically correct films very rarely are made. In the name of patriotism, you make wrong films. Patriotism itself, as Bernard Shaw said, is a very cheap sentiment. It has no relevance at all. So that's why many of the films which were made about the Muslims and of the partition later on, they failed, to represent the Muslims, and also they were not secular enough.
You opened Garm Hava with a series of black and white photographs. At first, the photographs are celebratory. They seem to show India in all its glory in terms of the different dances and the flag happening, and the flag is there. But then slowly the images get bleaker because you show guns and ruins, and finally you end with an image of Mahatma Gandhi, and on the soundtrack you hear the bullets, the sounds of the bullets. How did this opening come about behind the titles?
The title shots, we used a lot of footage which was available. Mostly there were stills which we used. Very few actual cinematic shots were there. There was some material available in the films division which had recorded some of the sequences, and a lot of when the migration took place between India and Pakistan, it was never documented properly. There was lack of documentation in any case in India of anything. Even today, your documentation is very, very poor. So we just managed some black and white stills, out of which we created a background for the titles.
Okay.
So we just wanted to show a bit of the reality which had occurred before we actually went into the life of a Muslim family.
There is a very interesting transition because you show these black and white photographs and the film is in color, and the very first scene is that of Balraj Sahni saying goodbye to someone who's going away on a train. That scene slowly turns from a bit of black and white to color. Am I right? So it almost seems to begin with those photographs and then go on to the story of this particular Muslim family.
Well, that was only a technical thing, because there were no color photography in those days, and one couldn't get news pictures in color.
Right.
Mostly it used to be in black and white. So that forced us to use the black and white still and then dissolve into color when the film started. At the railway station, and that engine becomes,
color.
That is it. Yeah, it becomes color.
Yeah.
That's the change.
Yeah.
And many people think that Garm Hava was a black and white film.
Oh,
No, it is not a black and white film, but we used the color in a very different way. There was different seasons: the summer, the spring, the winter, you know, the autumn. So every time we had to show, although the whole film was shot in winter, the coldest months we shot, but we tried to create a kind of clothing,
right.
which again, that also was designed by Shama. The clothes were made by Shama and Jaffrey's sisters also. So, so we made it, to wear a malmal kurta in the month of December in Agra. It is impossible, but we have to do it for the sake of the film. We have to do it.
So there is another. I don't know if this is a stylistic choice or not, but I just wanted to ask you about it. When Balraj Sahni character, he's evicted from his house, or he has to look for a new place to live in. So, but you show it very neatly by having him walk on a street, and on the soundtrack we hear the voices of the people who rejected him because of whatever reason, saying, "Oh, non-veg food, mass machi nahi, allow karte hai, aisa kuch." And even when he goes to one house and says, "I am Salim Mirza and main Musalman hu," and all that, and that man says yes, you still don't show the face of the person who is talking to him. You only show Balraj Sahni's face. And later again, when Farooq Sheikh's character goes for an interview, you only show Farooq Sheikh's face. You don't show the interviewer's face, though you hear the interviewer's voice. Were these budgetary restrictions, or were these done for a reason?
That was only a technique which I used. There was no need for the other character
Okay.
to be shown. So either a bank manager or a person, a landlord who is having a house vacant, it was not necessary.
Okay.
And some of the negative statements come from them. When a person like an officer in a Subramaniam who says it is better for you to
Go to Pakistan.
go to Pakistan instead of wasting your time in this country, he says. So it's a very negative attitude and a statement like that. So I didn't want to pinpoint this villain.
You didn't want to put a face to him.
By putting a face and giving identity to such persons. The bank manager also says that people have cheated the bank and gone away, and they have not returned the money.
Yeah.
They have gone away to Pakistan, and the bank has no way of getting back their money. So again, that character, although he is very sympathetic to Salim Mirza, is in a way a negative character.
Yeah.
So I try to avoid. It is not because I wanted to reduce the number of actors.
Yeah.
That was not the thing. I mean, people think by avoiding a character, I'm reducing the number of people.
Yeah.
It was not so. It became a technique. That's all,
Yeah.
and it was an interesting technique in a way. I mean, it was improvised on the spot.
One of the, the nicest things about the transition of this character Salim Mirza is, at first he's always like, "Sab Allah ki marzi hai. I'm going to hand this to Allah's hands. Allah will take care of everything." He's just like this guy, and almost until the end. Was this your way of commenting on people who believe blindly in certain things?
No, he was a devout Muslim, but he was not communal. You see, when you show people a minority community, you have to be very careful. There are people who are negative and then communal. You see, Salim Mirza's brother, again, was a Muslim leader. Although he says that India is my country and all that kind of claims he makes, but he is the very first person to run away to Pakistan. He was a negative character, you know. In the same family, the brothers, they differed, you know. Like further, if you go like that, in Farooq Sheikh's character, you know, he just wanted to know whether a Muslim has equal rights for education in this country.
Yeah.
You know. But there again, the elder uncle, he says, क्या पाकिस्तान में colleges नहीं है क्या? You know. I mean, your education, you can continue even there. You know. So this very carefully, this has been thought of while scripting. Actually, you know, Rajendra Singh Bedi, he was the man who sort of said that you should make a film on the life of Muslims who stayed back after partition. Although I am unable to write a story about that, but I think you should try. He had told Shama about that. And then that's how it so happened that when we talked, we were very close to Ismat Chugtai, and and she was from UP and she had seen partition. Her family itself got partitioned, and a lot of people went away to Pakistan and elsewhere. So she gave us a very interesting story. I mean, it was an unwritten story. And that old mother, you know, that we show is the grandmother of Ismat Chugtai, perhaps.
Oh.
Yeah, might have been, you know, that whole incident was taken from her family. And we also had to look for a person of that kind. And that itself was a very difficult part. And Balrajji always would say, where is my mother? I want to do the scenes with my mother. Where is... So we had talked to Begum Akhtar to do that role.
Wow.
And she had agreed to do that role, but last minute she said her husband is not allowing her to act. So we had to find somebody in Agra itself. And somewhere in the Kashmiri Bazaar in Agra, we found this lady who had an ambition to become an actress, you know, youth. And it so happened that I and my cameraman Irshad, we went to her in one night and asked her to come for a role, you know. And she was so, I mean, she didn't believe because she had gone to Bombay when she was very young, when she was about 16, 17 years old, and tried to get roles, you know, but she couldn't get. Then she had come back to Agra and had become a prostitute. And then later on she was running a brothel. So the day when we went, there was a raid in her brothel and all the girls were taken away by the police. And that night we talked to her and she started crying. You see, my whole life's ambition was to become an actress. But see, fate has brought you here, she said. And she started crying. A very touching thing, I mean, that itself will make a very interesting film. To think of the story of Badr Begum. And ultimately, she did get 2 awards for her acting. The UP Journalists Association gave her an award, and the West Bengal Journalists Association gave an award.
Wonderful.
For Best Supporting Actress.
Actually, your point about Salim Mirza not being a communal man, I think there's one part of the film in which it really comes through, and I was really intrigued by it because he goes to borrow money from a Seth, and at that point he says Ram Ram, just as a sort of greeting, right? It's like it's just common in UP. And then he said, "Aaj Lakshmi ke darshan karwane honge." So again, it's very rare to find Muslim characters in Indian cinema, making references to, Indian customs of gods. And I think that's really...
That was very deliberately done.
Yeah.
Right? When we went to Cafe Azmi to write the dialogue, we asked him to write the dialogue for this. And he changed many things. So, and he made the character a factory owner, the shoe factory owner, which was not so in the beginning. Our character, Salim Mirza, was a station master.
Oh.
Where a station master is seeing many of his relatives and friends, every day going away to Pakistan. But he changed it. He made it into a different, because somehow he says that this politically it is not correct what we are showing. So we will make him this kind of a character. And, the shoe trade was mainly in the hands of Muslims. The Hindus wouldn't take to shoe trade in Kanpur or in Agra or anywhere. There was a taboo against it. It's only the untouchables who used to make the shoes, and the Muslim owners were the factory people.
Yeah.
And but it so happens that after partition, when a lot of factories were available in places like Agra and Kanpur, the refugees who came from, the Hindu refugees who came from Pakistan, they wanted to establish themselves. So this taboo was removed and they started buying up these factories. And today, there are a lot of Hindu families which are running these factories in Agra. The shoe trade, has taken a different shape altogether.
Almost everyone who worked on this film was a leftist. So in a way, it was a fusion of the people's ideology as well as in a way, what the film was saying towards the end. Today, we don't find that much of politics in cinema, as in, yes, there are politically inclined filmmakers, but somehow their films don't seem to come from an internal politics as much as maybe the politics suits the situation or something like that. Would you want to comment on that?
You see, the Indian People's Theatre Movement was one of the biggest forces which happened in India. And K. Abbas, who was part of this whole movement, and the Progressive Writers Association, a lot of progressive poets and writers were there. And they started this idea of a people's theatre. And So when I made this film, I used mostly the actors from IPTA, whether they were from Agra or from Delhi or from Bombay. They were all members of the. So that way, there was an ideological cohesion, which normally doesn't happen, you know.
So even for that time, it was rare.
It was unusual, but there were films like, basically, Nichanagar, for example,
Yeah.
had that kind of a quality. There were people who had a lot of leftists working in films, like Zia Sarhadi, when he made Hum Log, Watan for Mehboob Saab. So he again had a lot of actors who ideologically leftist, you know, and that happened in certain few examples in the Indian cinema that you will find an ideological, you know, cohesion, and it helps a lot because the contradictions are not there politically. I mean, we had a couple of people who were not from the IPTA, like Jalal Agha was not a theatre person, you know. Jamal Hashmi from Hyderabad was an Iranian who acted in some Pakistani films earlier, and he had played a role in our film. And he's, you know, the Tabu, the actress, her father, Jamal Hashmi, he lives in Hyderabad even today, runs some kind of canteen in the stadium, in the cricket stadium. So otherwise, we all were from the IPTA, you know. So that helped a great deal in making them understand the need for a film like this, because it was dealing with a very strong ideological content. Because most films, you know, don't have any ideology at all. Many times, many of our films are irrelevant to the life of our country.
Is Munna the little boy who keeps flying kites at the beginning? How did you see that character?
Who?
The little boy Munna who flies kites at the beginning.
Oh, that little boy.
Yeah.
Well, he was one of the shoe factory owners' child in Agra, you know, who was quite mischievous, and so I just happened to, you know, locate him there itself in the same house where we were shooting, and we used him. That's all.
So is he did you want to show another generation through him, of that family?
Another generation. What is another generation? You know, many people ask me even today, why don't you make one more Garm Hava? But why should one make one more Garm Hava? Garm Hava as it is relevant today. Even today it has an audience.
You know? I was going to ask you that because when you made a lot of television later, and when partition themed shows like Bunyad and Tamas came along, I wondered if you felt like expanding Garm Hava into a multi story so that you could examine the same thing but in more detail.
No, I don't think so. You know, only the technology has changed today, because the digital technology has come in. So, but a film's narration doesn't change. Storytelling is the same. Whatever the technology is, you know, I mean, your editing patterns might be different because a lot of special effects are available in today because of the digital cameras. But I don't think telling a story has changed. Telling a story remains the same, you know.
So you didn't
So,
feel like expanding Garm Hava to a tele series or something like that?
no, many people have asked me for this question, but I don't think it's not like making a Mission Impossible 1, 2, 3, 4 or Speed 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah,
No, it is not that kind of a subject at all.
yeah,
Why should? You see, in its own lifetime, somehow, not intentionally though, it has become a classic. So it has its relevance no matter what, you know. So there are a few films in the world which become classics during
yeah.
its lifetime. No, for example, the other day I was watching an old film of Marlon Brando. Um, it was Viva Zapata. You can't make another Viva Zapata. You know, that whole thing is so beautifully conceived. Steinbeck's, you know, and you cannot repeat it. You can't make a second one. I mean, it can inspire another film, another revolution, you know, but you can't make another Viva Zapata. You can't make another Gone with the Wind, you know. These are things which happen.
And,
Rarely it happens in cinema.
and probably it would be even more difficult to make it because even when you made Garm Hava, you had to go through Bal Thackeray to get it released. And I
No,
think,
no, no, that was, it was not like that, you know. Some people had talked about in the laboratory where we were processing and watching the reels. So many people, they come, technicians, they watch also. And nobody restricts anybody from watching. So they said this film will not be passed by the censor. So it became a big issue. So then I knew Mrs. Gandhi and I knew Gujral Saab, who was the information minister. So I told them, look, I made a film like this. I would like to bring it to you and show you the film. So, because I'm not getting a censor certificate, because they were very apprehensive. And it took, ultimately, even with the influences that I used, it took 11 months for me to get the certificate. And in that time, my distributors, they said, we don't want the film. So I had a lot of problem. And ultimately, somehow, I was able to get a certificate after the film was shown in Paris. The premiere of this film took place in Paris. And then it was recommended for the Cannes Festival by a movie critic from Le Monde. Louis Marquerel was the person who recommended it. And then the Oscar people selected it for the Oscars for the foreign languages. So that's how it became important at that time. Then Bal Thackeray wanted to see the film. So I said, if you people want to come for the premiere at Regal Cinema. We are having a premiere, and Mrs. Vijayalakshmi Pandit is going to inaugurate the film. So if you tell me if you want 100 seats or something like that, we'll provide you. They said, no, we want to see it before it is released. So then we arranged a screening for them, but then Thackeray really liked the film.
oh, he did.
Yeah, and then he said, where is the producer? Where is the director? We didn't attend the screening. You know, they said, nobody has come, sir. But this is exactly what we want the Muslims to be in India, to become part of the mainstream. And this has the message. That message, it comes across very beautifully in this film, he said. So that we had no trouble with Thackeray.
But is it true that Mr. L.K. Advani said that this movie was probably funded by Pakistanis?
That L.K. Advani wrote in his that newspaper they publish. They have a publication organizer or something like that. So they publish like that. But later on, when he became a Minister for Information, and when I met him in Madras at a film festival, he apologized.
Oh.
He said, I'm very sorry I wrote that. Without seeing the film, I wrote. And somebody reported about it. So I had written wrongly about the film. He did mention. He was very, that way, graceful at the, I mean, I'm not a subscriber to the philosophy of the BJP, but that doesn't mean every member of the BJP is, there are good people there also, There are people who are more sensible. So you can't just condemn because we politically don't agree with them.
Finally, sir, you have an extensive body of work after Garm Hava, but somehow whenever the name MS Sathyu comes up, the first film that everybody thinks of is Garm Hava. It's almost like you made this one film and then just vanished. So
it happens.
How do you feel about that? That this first feature that you made, narrative feature, has become almost like an albatross, if you will.
No, these are just an accident. In fact, it is a bane in a way. I don't get. I would like to make more films, but I don't get the money to make the films. There are no people who are financing me, so it's very difficult. But it doesn't matter. It's not a question of the number of films that you make in your life. The type of films that you want to make, So to me, a more difficult subject was Bara or Suka in Hindi. It was much more difficult to make because it was a totally political film.
Anand Murthy.
Yeah, he had not even written the book. He had not written. He just had a few, in his manuscript he gave me. He had jotted down some ideas for his story. So from that, we built up the whole film. It is a nexus between the politician, the police, and the administration.
Right.
It's a very dry subject, and then it happens in a district like Bidar, which is about 80 miles away from Hyderabad. And it is an area which is always dry. There is very little rainfall there. The water is a big problem, And it was a very neglected area. So the whole thing happens in that kind of a place. And this whole game that the politicians play, with the lives of people. And that was a difficult subject for me to make. And Garm Hava was later on I felt was an easier subject because it was very sentimental.
So thank you for sharing your experiences with us, sir. And again, happy birthday. I hope you have a great lockdown birthday.
Well, this virus has stopped me from celebrating it. So I'm telling all the people that not to come. Normally, uninvited people will come. for my birthday, but this time, the 90th birthday, I requested them not to come because this virus, such a tragic thing which has happened the world over, and there is still no answer to it. And it's a very, very sad situation in the world, you know, and it's so tragic. So many people are dying. Innocent people are dying, you know, and scientists and the doctors are unable to root it out. It's a very unfortunate situation the world is facing. So sometimes you see, in mythology, you have something called pralaya. This pralaya means destruction of all good and evil. And a new life has to start. And that's exactly what is happening today. This virus is a pralaya.
So it's almost like the end of a yuga.
Yeah, it's a new thing. New life has to start. You know, it's a natural process. I think that's what is happening.
Be that as it may, I hope you have a very happy birthday. Thank you again for sharing your experiences with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.